CNN has learned that the president-elect's transition team has inquired about the possibility of allowing 3 of his adult children plus his son-in-law some sort of security clearance. Let's talk about that with Jonathan Wackrow. He's a former Secret Service agent who spent 5 years on President Obama's security detail. So you know a thing or two.
Yes.
Nice to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Let's just begin with, and again, I have to caveat all this with they're looking into the possibility of maybe requesting security clearances. If it goes through, what kind of intel would they have access to?
Well, it depends on what level of clearance they want to have, what type of business.
What's the highest they could have?
Well, there's secret compartmentalized information, SCI. That's when you really start getting into the real fidelity of the secrecy of the United States and different programs that are out there. I don't think that his adult children need that, but I think it's a great option, for them. We know that they're going to be, part of the administration in some capacity, even tangential, just part of an advisory group to the incoming president. So why not go through that vetting process just to, clear the air, make sure that they have, a top secret clearance that they can go back and stand upon, that there's no questions about foreign allegiances or any questions like that. I think it's a very good idea.
It's interesting you're saying that. They're on the transition team. We should be clear. We don't know exactly what role, if any, that they would have in the actual administration. But here's the rub would be, they're integral in the Trump business. And so one could come into, national security information or something that they could take and then use for business or vice versa. And isn't that a conflict of interest?
There could be, but they'll have to set up some sort of firewall to prevent that. I mean, look at today. Today, the president-elect received his first, presidential daily briefing.
Yep.
All right, so that's the highest, security level they can potentially get. Who's he talking to about that to? Who in his inner circle is he able to say, wow, this is what I just heard. How am I going to plan my government? So the president-elect needs to surround himself, very quickly by people who have the clearances, who have the ability to openly discuss the transformation of government and what's going on out there. I mean, so I think it's very important.
What about the White House? And the question I'm getting at is because President-elect Trump has mentioned maybe he'd like to spend weekends up here in New York in Trump Tower. Even President Obama was caught. It was a hot mic moment. Let me display this, where he said he would have maybe liked to have stayed in Chicago. Here he was.
So is this a residence house? Yes. So you live here as well? I stay in my house. You stay in the house. I wish I had the option.
Wish I had the option. Is it an actual option? If President-elect Trump wanted to spend a chunk of time in Trump Tower, would he even be able to do that, allowed?
Well, he's going to be the president, so and at the end of the day, yes, he can do whatever he wants. But the White House is the seat of power of the executive branch, and there's a massive structure. Again, it goes to there's something beyond Donald Trump being the president. It's the presidency. And there's a whole structure that's built around the presidency, whether it's national security issues, economic issues.
But as a Secret Service agent, would that have given you a coronary thinking of having to protect the president at Trump Tower, where other people live, on Fifth Avenue, one of the busiest roads in America?
It's a monumental task, but it's not unattainable. Listen, we'll protect the president. We do it anyway, right? So if the president leaves the White House and goes to San Francisco, we move the White House with him. We move the security, protective methodology around him anywhere he goes. So it's not unattainable. The biggest impact is on the people of New York. So that's where the administration, again, needs to be looking at every decision they make. Every action that he takes is going to have an equal and opposite reaction around the world, and specifically here in New York City.
John, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And thank you so much for being with me. I'm Brooke Baldwin here in New York. We're going to send it to Washington now. Jim Sciutto sitting in for Jake Tapper. The lead starts right now.
Thank you, Brooke. One of Donald Trump's favorite movies is Bloodsport, which also matches how some sources are describing the transition. The lead starts right now. One source compared it to a knife fight. Another used a term I can't say on the air. As Trump allies battle for key positions, some just heartbeats away from the presidency, and big announcements could come at any moment. From the reality TV boardroom to the Situation Room, what could Donald Trump's grown-up children end up seeing if they're granted unprecedented security clearances? Plus, do coalition troops know where ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is hiding now? Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jim Sciutto, in today for Jake Tapper and our politics lead. Conflicting reports out of Trump Tower, and depending on what you believe, there's either a purge going on or it's all smooth sailing inside the Trump transition team. Some sources tell CNN there is a knife fight going on behind the scenes, buffoonery, another source tells me. Another source telling CNN that stories of CNN dysfunction inside the Trump transition are being, quote, overblown. But there have been changes on the transition team, significant changes to say the least, just within the past 24 hours. I want to get right to Jim Acosta. He is in New York. Jim, do we know any big names who've been pushed out now?
Yeah, Jim. Mike Rogers, the former House Intelligence Committee chairman, he was a key transition figure. He is out. But I think the other big development today, Jim, today Donald Trump received his first presidential daily briefing, a rundown of threats facing the country presented by the U.S. intelligence community. It's another sign that he is easing into the business of being president of the United States. Trump and Vice President-elect Mike Pence met at Trump Tower to continue hashing out just who will join the cabinet in this incoming administration. And the fight over who will land there and where inside the administration, it is definitely on.
Don't tell Mike Pence vice presidents don't have much power. The new chair of Donald Trump's transition team now has a critical mission: to end the infighting over who will snatch up some of the most powerful positions inside the new administration. Among the frontrunners for key cabinet spots, Senator Jeff Sessions for Attorney General, Senator Tom Cotton for Defense, Trump Campaign Finance Chair Steve Mnuchin and Congressman Jeb Hensarling for Treasury, and former UN Ambassador John Bolton and Rudy Giuliani for Secretary of State. Giuliani is publicly jockeying to become the nation's top diplomat.
John would be a very good choice. Is there anybody better? Maybe me, I don't know.
But Giuliani may not be a lock, as some transition officials worry about his past business dealings overseas. And Bolton could put Trump in an odd position. Bolton was a strong supporter of the Iraq War, which Trump insisted he opposed.
Does everybody believe me? I was against going into Iraq.
You want to have a diplomat in charge of diplomacy. You don't want a bomb thrower.
Inside the transition team, one source describes a knife fight. As high-level advisor, former Congressman and CNN contributor Mike Rogers has stepped down, along with a slew of officials who worked for the team's ousted chairman, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. One former Bush administration official tweeted after his own exchange with the Trump transition team that applicants should stay away. They're angry, arrogant, screaming, "You lost. Will be ugly." Sources say Christie may be blocked from the cabinet altogether, and Trump surrogate Dr. Ben Carson says he's also out.
I've had lots of offers, but, I don't particularly want to work inside the government.
Another headache, Democrats are howling over Trump's selection of Breitbart News executive Steve Bannon as chief strategist, accusing the president-elect of putting a white nationalist in the West Wing.
I just want to underline something that every one of you know. Bigotry is bad for business.
After once criticizing Trump for using racist language during the campaign, House Speaker Paul Ryan is defending Bannon.
This is a person who helped him win an incredible victory, an incredible campaign. The president's going to be judged on the results of this administration.
But Trump appears to be sensitive to critics who point out he'll become the fifth president to have lost the popular vote. After once slamming the Electoral College, Trump has changed his tune, tweeting, "The Electoral College is actually genius in that it brings all states, including the smaller ones, into play. Campaigning is much different." One victory Trump can point to, he appears to now have much of the GOP on board.
We got these hats at conference today, and it's not just a great slogan, but inside the tag you see "Made in the USA."
And we're going to be seeing more of those red hats in Washington, Jim. But meanwhile, not all of the transition team's paperwork, we should point out, is in order at this point. The White House says it still needs Mike Pence to sign some necessary documents to keep the White House transition moving forward until Pence signs off and replaces Christie's signature, which is still on those documents. The White House says the transition process at this point is essentially frozen. Jim?
They need some time. Jim Acosta, thanks very much. Joining me now is Louisiana Congressman and House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. Congressman, thanks for being here today.
Good to be with you, Jim.
So we just saw you in Jim's report there showing off that famous "Make America Great Again" hat. You heard Speaker Ryan say earlier that the House conference is on, in his words, the same page as President-elect Trump. So I want to run through some of Donald Trump's signature positions during the campaign and see if GOP supports him in those positions. Let me start with the Muslim ban. Do you and the GOP conference support that as a matter of policy?
what Donald Trump has said, especially about the Syrian ban, is to put a freeze in place until you can properly vet who's coming into the country.
So it's not
Even
Syria,
the FBI
he
said,
did not
well,
say a Syria ban, he said a Muslim ban.
well, what he's talked about is making sure we can vet people who can come into this country to ensure they're not terrorists. And when ISIS is saying they're going to try to infiltrate and bring people into the United States that are terrorists, we ought to take that seriously. We ought to make sure that people coming here ought to be vetted and that we secure this federal border.
For
and that's
all
one of the things
Muslims,
Donald
you're saying?
Trump is talking
Does the
about.
GOP
For
conference,
everybody. We need to secure
for
the
every
border.
Muslim coming here has to be subject to the extreme vetting that Donald Trump spoke about during the campaign.
It's not a religious test. It's a security test. And that's what we've been pushing for a long time, to have a secured border. I think people all across the country want us to secure the border and make sure that terrorists aren't coming into our country. So there's a lot that can be done quickly to ensure that. But look, under President Obama, he hasn't been focused on the kind of things that make us secure here at home. And we want to reverse that.
Representative Scalise, during the campaign, a lot of pressure from the GOP for Hillary Clinton, if she were elected president, to cut all ties to her not-for-profit organization. Of course, Donald Trump has many businesses. There was talk of a blind trust, so it would be put in the control of his children. But ethics lawyers tell us that would not actually be a blind trust. Is the GOP conference going to push the president to sever ties with his businesses while he is serving in office?
Well, obviously, as part of the transition, that's one of the things that Donald Trump's got to deal with, and he has been. You know, he's talked about turning the company over to his children, and that he's going to have to detach himself from it. And frankly, even if you saw him on 60 Minutes, he said, you know, the company is not important to him right now. Saving this country is.
Yeah,
and I think that's why people were so attracted to his
understandable
campaign.
conflicts of interest if you are leading the country and you have many businesses based in the country.
And look,
I just
that's
asking
why
you,
you have,
does the
that's why
GOP
you have a
conference
lot
want
of,
him to cut those ties?
That's why you have a lot of good lawyers to figure all that out. That's one of the things that he'll be doing in the transition, is making sure that by the time he becomes president, it's all worked out. The good news is he's got a few more weeks to do it, as we're also preparing for that first 100 days and the things we need to do to get this economy moving again and get this country back on track.
Representative Scalise, I want to thank you for taking the time. We have some breaking news now, and that retiring Democratic Senate leader Harry Reid is speaking on President-elect Donald Trump. Let's have a listen.
This is a simple statement of fact. But it raises critical questions for us as a country, as a nation. How do we respond to the election of Donald Trump? Democrats want to work with Mr. Trump when we can. I understand and respect that impulse, because Democrats like to get things done. It's why many of us are in government. In fact, I think most of us in the first place. For example, Democrats have been trying for decades, multiple decades, to get Republicans to invest in our deteriorated infrastructure. What kind of a makeup do we have there in the infrastructure? Is it $1 trillion, $2 trillion? Some say $3 trillion. It's really in bad need of help and repair. It's an automatic job creator. Each time we try to do something over these decades on infrastructure, Republicans obstructed. So if we can finally get Republicans to make the job-creating infrastructure investments we've been seeking for years, that will be a welcome development for the Senate and the country. If Trump wants to pursue policies that will help working people, Democrats will take a pragmatic approach. Democrats have a responsibility to improve the life of Americans, all lives. But we also have other responsibilities. We have a responsibility to be the voice of millions of Americans sitting at home, afraid that they're not welcome anymore in Donald Trump's America. We have a responsibility to prevent Trump's bullying, aggressive behavior from becoming normalized in the eyes of America, especially the millions of young people who are watching and wondering. For example, if sexual assault is now a laughing matter. We have a responsibility to say that it is not normal for the KKK, Ku Klux Klan, to celebrate the election of the president they view as their champion with the victory parade. They have one scheduled. In other words, we have a responsibility to lead. Outside this Senate chamber, you can hear hammering. We have workers that are hammering on the platform for the inauguration ceremony. It'll take several months to do it, but it'll be done right. In 65 days, Donald Trump will step onto that platform. For 4 years, he will yield the loudest and most powerful microphone in the world. But even as those workers hammer away on Trump's platform, even as we as leaders accept the results of this election, we must also give voice to those who are afraid, because there are many that are afraid. Indeed, a majority of Americans oppose Donald Trump. Many of my Republican colleagues in this chamber oppose Trump. They weren't alone. Trump will be the first president to take office having lost the popular vote by 2 million. Every day for the past week, a majority of American voters have awakened to a difficult reality. Not only did that man who lost the popular vote win the election, but his election sparked a rise in hate crimes, threats of violence. Since Election Day, the Southern Poverty Law Centers reported hundreds of incidents of harassment and intimidation. Last count, 315 from their calculations. Overwhelmingly, hateful acts at a Muslim, and a Hispanic, and an African American, and a woman, and a LGBT, and a Semitic, and an Asian. I've heard these stories from friends and family. My and my wife's Nevada physician is a Pakistani American of Muslim faith. We think so much of him. We've known each other for 35 years. The day after the election, my friend was in a restaurant in Las Vegas having dinner. A man, approaching him in a threatening manner, said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Where are you from?" The man that approached him said, "I'm local." The doctor said, "So am I." That same night, in another restaurant in Las Vegas, a Pakistani physician was having dinner. A man walked up to him in the same manner, said, "Where are you from?" Said, "I'm from Pakistan." He said, "Why don't you go back?" One of my staffers has a daughter in middle school. I've known that little girl since she was a little baby. The day after the election, the principal addressed the entire student body on the school's PA system because the 2 incidents had occurred that he wanted to talk to them about. In one instance, a boy yelled at a Latina student, telling her that he was glad she was going to be deported now that Trump was president. In another instance, a boy was sent home for yelling the most derogatory, hateful term at an African American student. The boy justified himself by saying he used that language now that Trump was president. In Spokane, Washington, the Martin Luther King Center there was defaced with the same hateful word. Those are only a few examples of what people close to me have related. But these kinds of disturbing accounts have been heard across America. I have here, Mr. President, a compilation of these incidents. One is from NBC News. Another is from another publication. Hundreds of incidents in the last few days, and I would ask that be made part of the record. That was just entered into the record, those references made are awful, they're hateful, they're frightening, they're scary. I invite any of my colleagues to read these horrible acts, and invite any senator, Democrat or Republican, to come right down to this floor today and defend any one of them. These examples of hate and prejudice. I don't believe anyone in this chamber wants to defend the hateful acts that are being committed in President-elect Trump's name. They lead to one unavoidable conclusion. Many of our fellow Americans believe that Trump's election validates the kind of bullying, aggressive behavior Trump modeled on a daily basis. How can we teach our children that bragging about sexual assault is abhorrent if we rush into the arms of a man who dismisses this locker room talk? If we fail to hold Trump accountable, we all bear a major responsibility for normalizing his behavior. Here's a letter from a 7th grader from Rhode Island. She wrote the day after the election, and I direct quote from the letter. 7th grader. I'm extremely scared, especially being a woman of color, that the president of the country that I was born and live in is making me feel unsafe when I actually shouldn't feel unsafe. It's even scary because this man who is now the president of the United States of America has said such rude, ignorant, and disrespectful things about women and all different types of people, and is now in charge of our country. I want to feel safe in my country, but I no longer can feel safe with someone like Donald Trump leading the country. Close quote, end of letter. Our president is supposed to make people feel safe. But on Wednesday, a 7th grade girl wrote feeling frightened to be a woman of color in America because Donald Trump was president-elect. If we ignore her voice and other voices, this 7th grader will be left to conclude that we as a nation find her fear acceptable. How do we show her that she doesn't have to be afraid? The first step is facing reality. No matter how hard the rest of us work, the main responsibility lies within the man who inspired the fear. President-elect Trump must act immediately to make America, like that 7th grade girl, feel that they are welcome in his America. Healing the wounds he inflicted will take more than words. Talk is cheap and tweets are cheaper. Healing wounds is going to take action. But so far, Mr. President, rather than healing these wounds, Trump's actions have deepened them. And it's one of his very first, if not his first official act. He appointed a man seen as a champion of white supremacy as a #1 strategist in the White House. #1. Everybody else under him. According to CNN, and I quote, white nationalist leaders are praising Donald Trump's decision to name Stephen Bannon as his chief strategist, close quote. In the same article, white nationalist leaders say they see Bannon, quote, as an advocate for policies they favor, close quote. And according to the Poverty Law Center, Bannon, quote, was the main driver between Breitbart becoming a white ethno-nationalist propaganda mill, close quote. When asked to comment on Bannon's hiring, KK leader David Duke told CNN, again a quote, I think that's excellent, close quote. A court filing stated that Bannon said, again another quote, that he doesn't like Jews and that he doesn't like the way they raise their kids to be whiny brats and that he didn't want his girls to go to school with Jews, close quote. That's a court document. By placing a champion of white supremacists a step away from the Oval Office, what message does Trump send to the young girl who woke up Wednesday morning in Rhode Island afraid to be a woman of color in America? It's not a message of healing. If Trump is serious about seeking unity, the first thing he should do is rescind his appointment with Steve Bannon. Rescind him. Don't do it. Think about this. Don't do it. As long as a champion of racial division is a step away from the Oval Office, it will be impossible to take Trump's efforts to heal the nation seriously. So I say to Donald Trump, take responsibility. Rise to the dignity of the office of President of the United States instead of hiding behind your Twitter account. And show America that racism, bullying, and bigotry have no place in the White House or in America. I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business.
We've been listening there to Senator Harry Reid, the outgoing minority leader in the U.S. Senate, fewer than 60 days before he retires from the Senate in that position, giving what can only be described as an impassioned speech on the floor of the Senate, making the point, the argument that behavior that he described as bigoted should not be normalized. He went on to describe a number of incidents of hate chronicled by the Southern Poverty Law Center that have taken place since the election, which he tied to the rhetoric that had come from President Trump during the campaign, President-elect Trump during the campaign. Quite an impassioned speech from Harry Reid there. I want to bring in my panel now to react to this. We have Jennifer Jacobs. She's from Bloomberg, national political reporter there, Matt Visor from the Boston Globe, and Mike Rogers, former majority member on the House Intelligence Committee, and also recently with the transition team of Trump. If I could just ask you to react to this, perhaps you were inside the Trump transition team as you're listening to Harry Reid's criticism there of the rhetoric and the effect that it's having on the country. What's your reaction?
Well, first of all, I think you have to be careful. There are riots in the streets today. I think there's all of this unfortunate rhetoric feeds into both sides of this problem. I would hope that the majority leader would take his time to try to de-escalate this problem. I just think he's throwing gas on the fire. I never saw it. I was in the Trump team. Half of the team that I worked with on the national security team were women, by the way. There were minorities included there. But nobody looked at it that way. They looked at individuals who had jobs and responsibilities to get done. I'm hoping that we can get back to that kind of conversation. The longer that Harry Reid, I think, uses the floor of the United States Senate to continue to heighten people who are going to do dumb things, and they are racist and they're wrong. And guess what? That's going to happen, unfortunately. I just don't think we need to rise to the level of chronicling each one, making it sound like every neighborhood, every school, every location has these people in them. I just don't believe that's true. I think America is in a better place. Rhetoric will help us get in a better place. I think his rhetoric isn't going to do that.
Jennifer Jacobs, he took particular aim at the appointment of Steve Bannon as senior advisor to the president, and in his past statements and many pieces that appeared on Breitbart, the news organization that he ran. Does that have power at this point?
Yeah, well, for sure. And he just seemed to be re-upping the things he had said in that statement last week where he said, you know, Putin and ISIS are applauding the victory of Donald Trump, and that people have the, you know, it's rational for people to be afraid of this administration after all the things that Donald Trump had done. So it seems like he just wanted to repeat the things that he had said in writing last week and get that back out there in front of a TV camera. But yeah, for sure there has been a lot of talk about how people are afraid of Steve Bannon and what he represents. Is Steve Bannon a white nationalist? His defenders, his allies say absolutely not, that's not true. He's just a good conservative who wants good conservative things for this country. But there is no doubt that his website did have that sort of rhetoric, and he allowed it to be published.
Gave a platform. Matt Ryan, I wonder, as you listen to this, are people listening to Senator Harry Reid now? Is this a powerful voice at this point?
I think probably within the Democratic Party he is still. And you have this sense today, of course, we're seeing the House Democratic turmoil, you know, among House Democrats. And I think Harry Reid is vocalizing a portion of the party that wants to sort of punch back at Donald Trump at every opportunity. There's another portion of the party that is kind of ready to work with him on infrastructure and, you know, on some of the shared policies that they're starting to see. So I think that Harry Reid is, of course, the outgoing leader of the Senate Democrats. We haven't heard quite as much from Chuck Schumer, who may be more inclined to try and deal with Donald Trump. But I think that Harry Reid is definitely vocalizing what exists in a large section of the Democratic Party.
Although he doesn't, like as you say, he doesn't have to stick around and work with the president and these people on the Hill. Congressman Matt, Jennifer, please stick around. We're going to have more to talk about. They've had his ear since he announced he was running for president. So should Donald Trump's kids be given top security clearances? That's right after this.
The Lead with Jake Tapper, brought to you by Otesla. Learn more at Otesla.com.
If you have